Greetings, my friends. A second attempt here. I've got poor internet connection. Today's talk, October 27th, 2021, being nimble, being creative, the radical art, I want to use the word here, of simplicity. And that's a challenging concept because it's going to mean something differently for everyone. But let me dive into this. Welcome aboard. Today is part 8 of the series. Creative expression, the Mavericks class on creative thinking. Just a few announcements. I will, today, tomorrow, and Friday will be the final talks in this series, 11 parts in this master class on creative thinking, creative expression, the Dhamma artistry of living originally at the edges of one's own integrity. I'm going to take a week off or so. I'll be returning at some point early in November to continue a new series, I hope. I've mentioned a number of times, but again, I'm very honored to say I'm bringing forth an online video course that's been filmed and edited. That's been over a year in development. It is going up now on YouTube with Ferguson Jeffrey putting it up. We'll get it up in the next couple of weeks. There are beautiful notes and titles and references, and they've been subtitled. We're honored to be able to gift this 3-tier World Dharma video semi-anti-course, because it's really not about teaching anything at all. It's about, for me, illuminating the principles that I have seen over the years of my Dharma life that I have found infinitely valuable to the edges of my own understanding. And so that course is coming up soon. I'll talk more about it as it gets up. I have a children's book that's being illustrated right now by my friend Heidi called An Angel Appeared in My Room This Night. It's meant to give hope to the children. I'm very proud of it. It's a short little book. Hopefully it'll be up in a couple of weeks. And tomorrow I will be giving a talk, God willing, on the role or the interface of psychedelics and creative thinking, creative expression, which I'm really keen to discover what I think and feel about that. But that'll be tomorrow. Today, keeping it really short and simple, the art of simplicity. Many of you know of my connection to Burma, to the imprisoned state councilor Aung San Suu Kyi, the president U Win Myint, the senior member of the National League for Democracy, U Tin U Win Tain, so many hundreds of others who have been imprisoned since this coup, this terrorist coup that happened February 1st by Min Aung Hlaing, the former general of Burma's army. But more to the point is that Aung San Suu Kyi is being forced to undergo a mock Orwellian trial. There is no justice in Burma today. There is no rule of law. And I bring this up because it was reported, although there's been a gag order on her lawyers, it was reported that she declined calling witnesses on her behalf. And the reason was that she did not want to bring harm to these people or anyone. And I thought that in itself was a kind of timeless spiritual haiku, because she's known for the phrase that she brought forth, grace under pressure, as a way to describe courage, or grace renewed repeatedly under harsh and unremitting pressure. And although I'm not a political prisoner, I have entered the lives of many hundreds over the decades and written books about them. And much of what I've learned, and also being, in a way, a meditator, a yogi, a monk, there's some overlap in that it's a willingness to live in the most stark conditions with the most elegant and eloquent expressions of one's spirit. A political prisoner and a yogi are consciously embodying conscience and dignity and uprightness, and employing the timeless elements, if you will, of mindful intelligence, an awareness of the experience, a discernment, a critical thinking, a reflective memory, a reasonable depth of questioning, analytical doubt, open-mindedness, ethical decency, moral courage, and honest self-evaluation. Bringing these qualities to the forefront of one's own heart, mind, conscience, dignity, identity in the context of a stark environment. A political prisoner, as I understand it, lives either alone in isolation in a prison cell, under house detention, and or put into a cell with numerous other humans, often crammed in tight to the point where I'm told that there isn't even enough room in that cell where one can lie down, or all can lie down simultaneously. They have to do it in rotation. And so simplicity, I mean, there's so many degrees of this, probably an infinite spectrum of simplicity. And it isn't just simplicity in form or belongings, but that simplicity isn't the lack of nuance or courage or power. The simplicity of staying in intimate, sustained alignment to values. It's a type of narrowing in on what's really important. And I know as a yogi, one must make a radical decision to either interrupt one's externalization in society, listen to the voices of emotions that are complicated, that make daily life somehow semi, if not radically unsatisfying, and you listen to that inner calling, and it brings you into a more heightened respect, a heightened simplicity with what's really true. I think creativity is very aligned to what's really true in your soul. And enough courage to listen to that truth, feel that truth, hear that truth, express that truth in its original source, without the need for reward or applause or validation. The political prisoner like Aung San Suu Kyi right now, and many others in Burma and around the world, they have no support system in any way that's discernible to be in support of the best of themselves. They must rely so fully on oneself. The yogi, by oneself alone, the Buddha was said to have said, and by oneself alone is one defiled. But you're in the company of other nuns and monks and lay women and lay men, some of them as children, some of them as elders, and you have the workers that come and sustain the center. So you're in context and you always are living and breathing that, but at the same time your lifestyle is radically simplified to the point where you do nothing to feel everything. And in that feeling of more and more inclusion of one's inner world, that type of mindful intelligence begins to discern what's valuable versus what isn't. And so the simplicity becomes more and more aligned with just the respect to being present with the sense objects and the phenomenological flow of those objects, and the congruence of an awareness or a mindfulness with those objects. So there's a joint simultaneity with awareness and with a sense object in that type of simplicity. It's something so, for me, and I know those of you who've been yogis or are yogis, something so dharmically exquisite to live in that alignment, that paired arising and disappearing alignment of sense phenomena. In the seeing, as it said, just the seeing. In the hearing, just the sound, of vibrational auditory frequency, making sustained, unique contact with the ear, and an awareness of those auditory textures on the instrument of the ear, and an awareness of those auditory vibrations without translation. And if you do feel the translation, just the pureness of the thought about the sound. And that, there's something so beautiful about being able to control consciousness, to control mindfulness, to sustain the control of a conscious awareness of the phenomena at the senses in alignment to when they actually arise, so that you're in parallel unity. In the moment, there is presence with that phenomena. That level of disciplined mind, that simplicity, to me, I don't want to use the word basis, but something deeper, more sustaining, something more nurturing for my own creative expression as a yogi, as an artist, as a speaker, as a performer, as a writer, as a human, as a dad, as an embodied being in this great vast experience called existence. So I hope there's some place in you that's inspired to want to radicalize and reel in the distraction, the distracted mind, the mind that's impulsive, the mind that's flowing in a jagged way across phenomena without much control. And there's that sense of restlessness and worry and shame and doubt and desire and fear, pushing and grasping and holding and turning away, and all the various ways in which we distract from the simplicity and the pureness of just truly being present with that which is, listening there, feeling there, assessing there, bringing in that mindful intelligence to see the uniqueness of the texture, to see the light on the eye, to hear the sound on the ear, to truly be aware, mindfully aware of that taste. Although we've tasted it how many times in a lifetime, we're tasting it yet again with a degree of wonderment and awareness and discernment and deep critical intuitive thinking and reasonable questioning and reflection. And we begin to see more compelling common characteristics of the uniqueness of the sound, of the taste, of the sight, of the sensation. We begin to see these qualities of evanescence or impermanence. Sometimes when I'm just sitting in meditation and or walking on the beach or just breathing, and I'm in that awareness, just truly dropping into the simultaneity of multiple awarenesses in an orchestration of presence, and feeling the impermanence of perception, of sensation, and the just living in that arising and molecular disappearance of phenomena. And right there, there's things that come through. How simple it is, if in fact we learn more of the fine Dharma art of engaging consciousness consciously, insightfully, wisely. That vocation isn't just happen chance. Learning to occupy and engage consciousness and phenomenology and the sense objects insightfully and wisely, to know how to inhabit that which is present wisely. That's simplicity. So thank you for tuning in today, keeping it easy. This is the 8th part in an 11-part series. I'm going to take a break. I've mentioned that. Coming on Friday. I'll return, God willing, in some days, weeks. Tomorrow, I'll be giving a talk, the 9th part in the series, Creative Thinking and Psychedelics, something I'm personally experimenting with on a regular basis. I have a film that I am working on. I'm very moved by it. It's a challenging creation. I hope to dive into a more sustained 30-day retreat where I can craft it and somewhat script it. And I want to find a place, hopefully here on the island, where I can engage a 3-week studio, highly controlled studio shoot of a couple of hours a day to have a little bit of a set and dive in to this expression. It's going to be I feel the most important creative dharmic expression of my life, to explore the mandala inherent within consciousness, the whole spectrum, as much as I can feel it and have the courage to see it and communicate it, of good and evil in this Dharma art, to the vocation of pushing back denigrating forces. I mean, I was just thinking this morning, just as on a tangential stream, of the why for me, of really the existential why, is I want to participate in the field of consciousness, in the blip of a lifetime, to do my part in eradicating evil, apartheid, totalitarianism, and violence, and xenophobia, all the ways in which oppression takes place within the context of life. And to me, it's so much about a consciousness engagement. I don't know too much of what's happening outside. I see it, I hear it, I think it's outside. I don't know how much of me is outside and how much of outside is in me. How much of what I see is moved by what I feel or don't know, and how much of the outside would change based upon the change of my own inside. And I'm very fond of the mandala, the spectrum of symbols. And symbols of good and evil are one thing, but how intelligently can we inhabit those symbols to creatively engage them, to transform them? A transformational piece of cinema and musicality and artistry that combines Dhamma, spirituality, existentialism, radical politics, and very connected for me personally of high rebellion. I think that's a very strong word for me. The cognitive courage, the cognitive art of existential rebellion. I decidedly have no interest in being one with this sociopathic existence. And I feel that my role, I don't know about you, is really an existential activist, an existential rebel, a mystical activist, someone who is here to do everything possible to eradicate the sources of suffering and conflict and abuse within my own mind, within this mind, and equally in context, in my own humble way, in the world. And art to me is really the antithesis of religion. It's the creativity to curiously and radically engage the phenomenology on the terms of your own conscience and integrity. Democracy will mean something different for all of us. There's a template called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 30 articles that illuminate, I would like to say, the wisdom of dignity, the wisdom responsibility of understanding the textures of conscience. If only we had a psychedelic right now to drop like one mega small big dose on the conscience of a leader, to soften the pride, the arrogance, the deceit, the denial. If only we could understand the machinations of denial and deception and callousness, the opposites of empathy. The psychedelic is prayer in dynamic, organic action. But inherent in the psychedelic, there is no wisdom. The wisdom is inherent in consciousness, and consciousness and wisdom and the psychedelic molecule merge, and therein lies, based on the individual strength of character and principle, we have a moment of creative possibility to do something remarkable with that insight. And it requires timing and courage and resources to communicate the evidence of one's own interiority. I think of my friend Aung San Suu Kyi. In her silence, probably not even aware that the remark would come, "Who do you want to call as your witnesses?" And she says, "No one." You can hear in her own mind, I do not wish to bring harm to anyone based on my circumstances. Something so beautiful about that, the elegance of conscience in action. To me, that is Gandhi's handful of salt to the sun. That's Rosa Parks sitting at the front of the bus. That's Martin Luther King's I Had a Dream. That's Nelson Mandela's 27 years behind bars, and he said, there wasn't a day that went by that I did not think of my freedom and the freedom of my people. That level of simplicity, 27 years looking out of a prison cell. As a political prisoner, anointing conscience over the convenience of conformity to apartheid. If only we had, if only, right? And we are artists and Dharma artists, creating a song, a sonnet, a poem, a new form of five-dimensional psychedelic that activates regardless of one's denial and ambitions and ignorance. It anoints the innate wisdom seeds within ignorance. You become your own unique rose, your own unique fragrance, but your radiance is one of harmony and unity, not denigration, control, totalitarianism, and violence. That duality and the gradations of that duality is art. How well do we know that spectrum? How well do we inhabit that spectrum with creative expressions of thought, speech, and actions, behaviors? Just simply, Aung San Suu Kyi saying, I refuse to call any witnesses. In her language, she probably said, no, thank you, and left it at that. I think of my friend, mentor, unthinkable political activist, revolutionary, Dharma savant, the late U Win Tin, a co-founder of the political party normally associated with the Aung San Suu Kyi and a few others called the National League for Democracy, Burma's revolutionary lion, a lion of ethics, a lion of conscience, a lion of dignity, a lion of freedom. This gentleman had the right to roar, and he did it with amazing, I would call it the roar of moderation. The symphony of quietude, behavior as a more powerful expression than shouting or words alone, although his words were spare, but they were, I want to say the word pointed, but is there a way to have a crystal-shaped sword? A radiance of light, rather than slicing, illuminates the delusion within darkness. A willingness to know that you will be tortured based upon how you think, and the refusal to disavow yourself from that thinking, to conform either through coercion of wealth and gifts, a form of torture, and or the fear of violence to you, family, and friends through torture and violence. A refusal to move from your conscience. We have examples. empowering examples, if we are able to read their words, listen to their poems and sonnets, talks, feel stories about their radiance, and know how to oxygenate our own dignity, our own conscience, our own willingness to play out of the conformity of expected roles. And wow, the psychedelic, which tomorrow I'm going to speak about, it really, okay, I cannot be who I normally am in this circumstance. And you look in the mirror of your own denied pretense and you look like an idiot when you look in the mirror and you go, God, am I babbling on with this stupidity yet again? And you've recorded it with your iPhone on a tripod. You go, even when you see it again, it's right in your face. You go, that's not me in the mirror of me. The denial is so thick, but at least you've got a record of it that you can play anytime. Bury it, throw it away, give it to a friend, put it in the vault, put it as your 6th wish in your 5 wishes manifesto. Under no circumstance ever tell me that I told myself to tell the truth to myself. Tell the truth to myself. Political prisoners live and thrive on truth. So rad. Yes, I hear of stories of where there's corruption, but I'm getting back to the art of simplicity. I'm in a retreat right now, consciously, a mindful retreat, an organized set of behaviors throughout the day, and within that, it's releasing a lot of intimate thoughts and feelings and emotions. It's not easy a lot of the time. I'd love to be held and loved and touched and kissed and massaged and musically played with and all the things that come with being in context with other. And equally, it's my time to be simple. Keeping the music down low to begin to hear my own innate music more clearly. Art, how well can you hear what you normally dull, drowned out, avoid, whatever you do to negate your angels, your coterie of existential, spiritual, emotional, psychological, cognitive, physical allies. I've seen in meditation, I've seen on psychedelics, I've seen in intimacy when I'm doing my yoga and I'm walking. There are forces that are unseen but are felt if we feel them in the simplicity of presence. Call upon your supports from time immemorial. We are interconnected, not just with other, but with everything. And there are forces like friends in our lives, true friends, who seek actively our well-being, who rejoice in generosity to us. Can you greet that generosity of a lover, of a friend, of a Kalyanamita, with the grace of simplicity, namaste, the ultimate of words, perhaps? I honor the God in you as the God in me, and we rejoice in the ubuntification of a shared higher order God, Goddess, growing together through each other, calling upon the forces in your retreat, the political prisoners who I've had the good fortune to speak with and feel over many years, including Daw Aung San Suu Kyi and U Win Tin. They're not living in isolation. They're not living in solitary confinement. They know they don't abandon their roles of caretakers, fellow, nonviolent activist soldiers of the dream of a collective freedom that includes even the enemy. You get to draw upon timeless forces, they tell me. As an artist right now, as a yogi, I belong to the lineage of Dhamma, primarily found within the Buddhist tradition in Theravadan. but it's a timeless teaching. It doesn't belong to a religion. It doesn't belong to a church. It doesn't belong to a culture or a language. There's a radiance. It's a quantum language, an existential language, a democracy language, the language of reciprocity, lawfulness, coherence, intimacy, collective wisdom. And drawing upon that. That's what retreat is. It isn't just isolation. Mindfulness and mindful intelligence is drawing upon timeless principles that connect us to the reservoir and the ocean of wisdom and the rainbows of freedom that are unique to you and me. U Tin told me, U Win Tin told me, in a paraphrase, you can read his exact words in 5 long interviews that we did. I think they're in volume 2 of our books Fergus and I put forth, called Burma's Voices of Freedom. U Win Tin. 21 years in solitary confinement. Early on in his incarceration, he was violently tortured, and he lost his teeth. Most were cracked. It's unthinkable that he lived for 21 years with cracked teeth, and the nerves and the pain of that. He said he learned to adjust. Imagine that challenge, and to draw upon the purpose of his activism, freedom. And many of these political prisoners, they don't even expect it in their lifetime. They participate in the revolution knowing they're going to end up tortured and imprisoned, knowing that their behavior, their lifespan will likely be forgotten. Most of the political prisoners who aren't really known, no one even knows who they are or where they are. They've disappeared. But many of them tell me that I've met who've been released, they're very prepared never to be known or remembered. And they're drawing upon a timeless movement of humans and entities and deities and angels and beings, whatever the configurations of life forms are in this universe. We're in that march of creative Dharma artistry towards the radiance of a more benevolent cosmos. That's so important for me, is that our activism isn't just political. It's existential in nature. I don't think evil is eradicated through oneness in non-duality. There are forces within this invisibility that are so skillfully camouflaged by ignorance and denial, I've seen it, that many of the most illustrious belief systems out of the Indian subcontinent, mixed with our own earth wisdoms in the rest of the world, don't really hold up to the radical revolutionaries as the forefront of existential awakening. They're playing very down deep, and I know many of them. Aung San Suu Kyi is not a political activist. U Win Tin isn't a political activist alone. These people. This is why I love Burma so much. It isn't just Burma, Burma. It is a timeless culture rooted in the most, for me personally, compelling expression of spiritual existential intelligences that co-occupies politics and democracy and artistry. They cover off on all these dimensions for me. And U Win Tin told me he lived in this prison cell without a bed and a pillow, without a place to defecate and urinate, without a book or a pen or a pencil for 2 decades plus. And he would artfully and with unthinkable modesty, after his release, and he refused to be released on any other grounds than just honorably. They tried to coerce him, buy him out, not to be involved in politics, to disavow his relationship to Aung San Suu Kyi and other members of the revolution. He said no. He refused to take off his prison uniform, to stand, to sit, to speak, to live in solidarity with the multitude of other political prisoners who weren't released. He gave up his home, his book contracts, and whatever money came from those was donated to a foundation to the families of political prisoners in Myanmar to support them. And he lived in a very, very small open-air shack in an extremely busy area of Yangon, where I spent those days with him. And he described his interior in these 5 hour-and-a-half discussions. I feel so honored, so blessed. And he wasn't alone. There were many others. Although I interviewed something like 34 for the books, there's several hundred others that we just didn't have the time to transcribe and to edit and bring into the books. They're there, though. They will come out eventually. There'll be a volume 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I pray. He said there was one time where he would take little chips of brick and rub them into powder and put a little water on them, and eventually, ever so lightly, little bit by little bit, print a particular word on his prison cell. Freedom. Imagine the simplicity of that. Imagine, for me, imagining right now the interior simplicity, but the fire, the stealth, the strength, the power, the conviction, the uprightness. The gentleman, when you looked at him, like a lot of the political prisoners and a lot of the people living in Burma, because the whole country is a prison, prisons within prisons in Burma. And it seems that in our own country right now, there's the rise of that level of violent totalitarianism. Call it communism, socialism, whatever. It's violent. And the stillness wasn't just still. It was a hard-earned simplicity to know what really moves you to associate with inside. Discipline isn't so difficult for me personally. It's having the ongoing evolutional courage and insight to know what you don't want to participate in. And I know it's rather challenging to think that way, but I don't know how one does art without quieting some things to illuminate other things. So simplicity. I will end quickly with a short story that's always been in my heart. My best friend in Burma, until he passed away, Ukundala. He once took me to an old age home to meet his parents, who were both monks. And in front of us were 3 elderly women as we walked in. And he said, "Please excuse me, I'll be back. Please talk to them." And my mother is there in the middle. And I walked up and in my fledgling Burmese spoke with the women. But Ukundala's mother spoke English and mentioned that her son had told her about me. It was curious on why I would give up life in America in a Western culture. Why aren't you married and enjoying your wife and family? And I felt slightly put off by that. I'm a monk practicing timeless teachings of awakening in your Buddhist country, a far higher priority than the family in a Western world. And she asked me if I was happy. That's always a complicated question to ask. It just depends on the second, right? And I kind of artfully said, yeah, sometimes I'm working on it. You know how us Buddhists are, always trying to be happy, but never quite there. And then I looked at her and I asked, "Are you happy?" I didn't do it with a sense of anger or belligerence or arrogance, but when I asked the question and I looked at her opened eyes, and you could see that they were covered with a kind of gray haze, and Ukundala hadn't told me that she was blind, and all of a sudden I realized that she was blind. And I don't know about you, but blindness is a bit of a challenging, if not terrifying, proposition. Among fears, being without sight is one of the big ones. I think I'd much prefer to die. Could you fall in love? Probably, but challenging. Not to be able to open your eyes to see who you're speaking with, to see the food you're eating, to walk, to see sunsets. It's challenging. And I asked her, "Are you happy?" I felt bad. And she said, immediately, "I'm really happy," with this beautiful, radiant smile. I've told this story so many times, but it's never timeless. I mean, never beyond the heart of how I feel about this experience. And she said in a short way that I have everything I need. I think of Aung San Suu Kyi in an undisclosed prison cell in her country. I think of 21 years of U Win Tin in a prison cell. I have everything I need. I think of my brief years in a monastery as a monk. I have everything I need. And it's not just physical things, food and medicines and shelter, the friends I'm blessed to have, but a deeper simplicity, a deeper radiance of the word everything. Because once you arrive at everything, to me, then you begin to have everything that you don't have, that's inside, begin to arrive. And I think that's the creative thought, the creative expression. It's the rejuvenation of existence, creativity and rejuvenation, creativity and originality of the rejuvenation and the restoration, the restorative energy, the healing energy, the living energy, creativity and living and rejuvenation and innocence, and writing with chalk that takes months to powder, freedom on your prison cell, on the wall of your mansion, on the whatever it is, the wall of your denial, the wall of never enough, the billionaires and the billionaires and the billionaires and the trillionaires, and how much more heirs before there is no heir because of the lack of respect, for I have everything. And Ukundala's mother said, I have a shelter to sleep in, I have adequate blankets when it's cold, I have clothing, I have indigenous medicines when I'm ill, I have a well, although it's cold, especially in the winter, it invigorates me. And she put her hands on her women friends' laps and said, I have my friends who speak to me about life. And they tell me some of the things that they see, and it's like poetry in my own mind to hear their words about what the sunset looks like, or the bird flying, or the person's features, or even what they look like. Contentment, simplicity, I have everything. And then Ukundala walks back, my friend, and introduces me to the gentleman who's bent over on a cane as his father. And the father sits down in between the women next to his wife, and she looks up in her blind eyes that are full with light and says, with her hand on her husband's, and love really helps. And there you go. Today's sharing, the art of simplicity. And that love, allowing longing to have its own virtue. At the same time, filling the spirit as much as humanly possible with the gift of your own radiance. And I've often said, and I'll say it again, be the chemistry that you seek. And from that mutuality of unexpected serendipity, called the magic of intimacy and friendship, romance, eroticism, and love, and joint creativity, the erotification of Ubuntu. I cannot be who I am artistically without you. Musing through you and me together, we create something beyond you or me, and it's larger than us. Yes, I'm calling in creative team players, editors, videographers, writers, young minds, old bodies, doesn't matter, and radical editor and a radical videographer where I can go into a creative space personally here, a call out. Please come into my life, goddesses and gods, to create a month-long immersion in the scripting, and then 3 weeks of a 7-part, I want to call it a cinematic, radical expression of the mandala of existence, the good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful, and bring forth comedy and satire and humor and prose and poetry and sincerity and irreverence and radical, heavy existential metal and splendor of intimacy and high tantra, post-tantra. Bring up and in as much as possible the spectrum of emotions to create a kind of non-violent existential mind bomb, like an existential psychedelic that hopefully plays in cinemas worldwide and Netflix and everywhere else, even online, doesn't get canceled, and if it does, it's reborn somewhere where it's safe, so that that one boy and girl in that prison cell of time, wherever she or his life is manifesting, goes, aha, U Win Tin's life matters. His 21 years in a prison cell are unlocked for the world. His books, our books, Aung San Suu Kyi is incarcerated and likely to spend the rest of her life in prison. Her words, her radiance, her courage will be known worldwide. Your art is the gift to life and the future of life. We don't need more money, more savings, more fear, more consumerism, more objects, more stuff, more stuff, more stuff. Yes, simplicity of food, simplicity of lifestyle. So from my heart to yours, thank you for tuning in. Tomorrow, if I can make it, the role of psychedelics, I can only speak for me, and creative thinking, creative expression. And I hope you'll tune in. Today is the 8th part in the series. I will stop on Friday to take a week off, give or take. And may you have a beautiful day. Thank you for tuning in, and hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you.